All right, 6:03 p.m. on February 28th, we'll call to order a regular meeting of the Board of Education. Let's stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Sue, is there anything to note as far as additions, deletions? No? Okay. Is there a motion to accept the minutes of the February 7th meeting? Jackie, second? Mel? All in favor? Aye? Okay, let's move right into the budget presentation. Jean and Brian?
I want to thank everyone for providing time and to be here, and the folks at home who are watching. Our presentation tonight pulls information and evidence that align to the board's proposed mission, vision, and goals. We used information from budget meetings with school principals and directors, ongoing data analysis and input from the content specialists, and input from other stakeholders, from district committees and shared decision-making teams to provide the foundational information included in tonight's presentation. The overarching goal moving forward in building a recommended budget, and what you will see in subsequent presentations after tonight, is our effort to maintain pre-pandemic staffing and resources and provide evidence-driven and fiscally responsible recommendations for additional staffing and resources that are closely aligned to that mission, vision, and goals. So the goal of this presentation really is to develop a shared understanding of how we're doing as a district by highlighting some program strengths and challenges, and then clarifying areas for future focus, so that when we do make budget recommendations in upcoming presentations, they're going to target those areas of focus that are aligned to the board's goals. When you think about everything that we want for our students here to improve student outcomes, anyone that you ask, parents, students, staff, they want kids to improve. They want to be better in academics, better in athletics, better people in general. So that's a shared sort of goal that we have as far as improving student outcomes. And this presentation really sort of identified, using those draft goals of communication, academics, culture, and climate, to make sure that we are providing high-quality professional development, designing and refining curriculum over time that is aligned to standards, is challenging for students, and meets the needs of a wide range of learners in every classroom. And thinking about the integration, we oftentimes think about social emotional learning and academics in silos. And that's a great way when you're trying to learn new things, kind of think of them separately. But the work we want to think about doing moving forward is really integrating academics and social emotional learning so that we're really addressing the whole child in the classroom.
So we are changing demographic in our district. Our population over the last, I can speak for the last 15 years, has gone down quite a lot. I believe there were about 2,300 students in the district when I came, about 650 students in high school, almost 700, and now we're just below 1,800. And as Jean created this slide, she did the dichotomy between 10 years ago and today. So it's kind of neat to see that as well. And you'll notice that although we are smaller in population, we're greater in diversity. We have more students who are identified as students with disabilities, and you see some of the other demographics that are there. And we see that as a strength because all these things help to contribute to great schools and brings more richness to the work that we're doing. These are class sizes represented for the 23-24 school year. We always aim to try and keep the class sizes of the lower grades as smaller, because we know all of the requisite skills that students are learning at that time. And for the most part, we can do that. Of course, student population, it's weird when you look at grade levels over the entire district. You have a class of 140, then you have a class of 115, then you have a class of 150, there's no way, it's very difficult to predict sometimes, and you have teachers who, at the elementary especially, sometimes have to move to different grades so we can maintain the smaller class size. I know 18 looks like a lot of pre-K, but remember, 18 is the cap in New York State for us to have one teacher and one teaching assistant in the classroom. If we were to have one more student, we need one more adult in the classroom. So and we can't go above 21, I think, or 22, 20. Yeah, so we cap at 18 and we try and fit as many students as possible into those seats, obviously. And at the middle school, you can see we have small class sizes in 6th and not too bad in 7th and 8th. So we are always talking about class size. I just wanted to make note of this. All of us that have taught, it's difficult to teach a class of 32 kids sometimes because you have a lot of diversity, a lot of needs, sometimes chaos, sometimes you're crowded into a space. And likewise, if you have a class of 12 or 13, sometimes you have dead silence. You don't have a diversity of conversation, you don't have that interaction of creativity or even student needs, you know? Sometimes you need a diversity, enough of a diversity in order to have really positive student interaction. And in fact, there's some great research about this. Hattie, who is, I think, the preeminent world-renowned expert on education in the world, has done a meta-study on this. He looked at over 1,200 different studies on what makes for the best student academic outcomes, student achievement. And strangely, class size ranked at 186 out of 252. Common sense would say it would be like number 2. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But like I think for some of the reasons that I described, it fell well below the halfway point in those 252, and it has an effect rating, that's a statistical term, of 0.2. And Hattie also says, basically anything that's lower than 0.4, you're not getting any return for your money. So I just wanted to note, we have small class sizes and we will continue to have small class sizes, but I wanted to note that that isn't necessarily the thing that makes any school better or worse. At the high school level, I grabbed these from our 21-22 school report card. They focus specifically on core classes, which is why you see just see math, science, English and social studies mentioned and not the specials, but this is from our 21-22 report card. There is a huge lag in New York State school report card reporting. It's redundant, but so we actually don't have their data from 22-23 yet, but with a slightly smaller school student population, those numbers are probably still pretty accurate.
So now I just want to shift to, and I said this at the beginning, so how are we doing before we start talking about what do we need to do about it? And I broke this into, and a lot of this data isn't necessarily new, and for those of you who have been coming to the Board of Ed curriculum and instruction meetings, you know that we've talked about this at at least in two separate meetings we'll be talking about again next week. When we think about achievement and the assessments that achievement tests have a set bar, and then we measure students against that bar, how close they get to it and exceed it. So one measurement of that is the 3 through 8 assessments and the New York State regions. And what's important, I think, in noticing this is we have some evidence of strength, but also some challenges. So when we think about some of the strengths, when we see our results compared to our regions results on many of our regions exams, compared to students statewide, our students are outperforming students statewide. So we have this wider pool of students across New York State, and our students are doing well on many of our regions compared to that bigger pool. A challenge that we have is that RCS students are underperforming compared to similar schools. So if we narrow that pool down to school districts in New York State that look more like us, our students are underperforming students in those schools. And that is true for most of the regions and all of our 3 through 8 testing. So that is definitely a challenge for us as far as how are we doing, at least noticing that we have room that we can make some improvements comparing ourselves to folks who look like us. There is one exception for the 3 through 8 assessments on the Science 8 and the algebra test. Our students, our 8th grade students who take the algebra test, they are outperforming students statewide. So there's some strength there. Another way that we can look at students is, I don't think of it as opposite of achievement, but it's definitely a way to measure students when you do have lots of different abilities in your classes and a range of student needs. When you look at growth, that is basically comparing a student to themselves. So where do they start and how far have they gotten over the course of the year? So if they start and they are significantly below their peers, but they're making steady progress, that is really positive. So we measure that in the district using FastBridge assessments. And the ones that I pulled for this, and I looked at growth from fall to winter. So it's a shorter span of time, but it's important because many students come to school in September with some learning loss. It's typical, it's expected, they haven't been in instruction for several weeks. So they typically start the year a little bit lower than they maybe even ended the year before. And then you would expect that you would see some significant growth from September to January. With growth scores, we do have some strengths. We have some students who are demonstrating the FastBridge A reading and A math. Those are both assessments that students in grades 2 through 8 take. And those are like broad reading and math skills. So, comprehension, vocabulary for reading. I'm going to get lost on some of the math terms, but basic computation, algebra, simple algebra. And those tests are also responsive to the student. So as the student answers questions correctly, they get harder. And as they answer questions incorrectly, it will get easier. So it really matches where the student is. What we found is some strength, because when we looked at the early reading and early math assessments, which is really foundational math and literacy skills, we are seeing that there are fewer students at risk in the winter compared to the fall. And with A reading, we see a little bit of that, but probably not as much as we would want to, because we're only seeing fewer students at risk in grades 2 and 3. And remember, that's a test from grades 2 through 8. And then with math, we actually see more strength because we see fewer students at risk in grades 2, 3, 4, and 8. So we're seeing some pockets of kids who are making that movement that we would want to see them.
Elementary schools?
Yes, yep. Sometimes I think it's helpful to have the schools broken out, but sometimes I think when we talk about programming K-12, it's important to just bring them together. Yes.
It's like FastBridge A reading, for example, there's
Yes.
fewer students at risk in grades 2 and 3. So what about grades 1, 4, and 5? Does
So
that mean they're staying the same?
Well, with the A reading, first graders and kindergartners don't take that assessment.
Okay.
And then for the rest of the grades, from 4, 5, 6,
Yep.
7, 8, they are not showing growth on that assessment.
Are they, so they're not showing growth, does that mean they're staying the same, or is there loss of ability also?
It depends. When I started looking at individual students, you do see some students go down. So I try to look at it holistically, because the other thing that can be hard as students get older with assessments like this is some students, they have testing fatigue and they don't necessarily demonstrate what they do know on an assessment like this. So I try not to look too much at the kids who drop, really significantly drop. But I do like to look, and it will be interesting to see fall to spring, because that's really important. And I know kids but they have a whole year's worth of learning, and a lot happens from January until June. Particularly at the elementary school, there tends to be more growth, just like developmentally as people, we do a lot more growing when we're little. And the growth is more incremental as we get older. So it's important to take a look at. But yes, there are a number of students who did far worse.
It's important to remember also, these are nationally normed tests, and it's like a treadmill. We're walking along on the treadmill, but while you're walking on it, it's starting to climb. They're expected to be advancing, and they're advancing against everyone else in the country. So it isn't just like you said, Mike, are they not gaining? The target is moving each time they take the assessment as well. So it's complex. It's a complex thing. They could be improving, but they're not improving at the pace of everyone else as the target moves.
Thank you, that's a good point.
Reflected in their chart for their own personal growth. So if you were to pull out each kid, you would be able to tell if they're making growth.
Yes.
Because my chart for my son shows, and he even said it, he looked at it, he goes, oh, I can see why I got reading help in first grade. Like, he as a fourth grader looked at it and knew that that drop signified that he needed help. He was way below what he was expected to do.
Yeah. And I know that the middle school AIS teachers do share those reports with students, as a way to, set goals and think about how they might want to,
I would argue it could be done younger than that. I mean, he's in fourth grade and he identified that within moments of looking at it. He looked at the graph and he saw the dip.
The last piece, when we were trying to consider how are we doing, was really getting input. Now, we went kind of macro with state assessments, came down a little bit more into district assessments, and then really looking at classroom performance. And the teachers that I've been working with, particularly the content specialists in our conversations around data, really have identified a couple of key areas that they are observing and reporting that students really need to develop in these three areas. The first being independence and resilience. And they talked about it through the lens even of kids who are more skilled or have developed those skills. Our students tend to want to be affirmed more often. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And what they want to see, and what we'd like to be able to build with our students, is independence. I'm going to try this because you've given me the tools to do it. I might not get it, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to try a different way after I get some more feedback from you, and that's the resilience piece. The other two items kind of go hand in hand, but we talked a lot about students writing and students having really grasped concepts and understandings when they talk about it, when they're presenting in classes, when they're talking with their peers, even when they talk one-on-one with the teacher. But when it comes to actually on writing tasks where they have to write and describe, write and explain, write and compare, that knowledge that they have is not being demonstrated at the same level. And then the third piece is really two parts, because we've talked about students having stamina for reading, longer passages, just being able to read. And I see it in my own reading and thinking about when you're reading your news feed and you're constantly clicking, you're reading a quick snippet and you're moving on. And that is a habit. So in addition to reading longer text and sustaining that stamina is really introducing and having kids understand more complex texts. One of the challenges and one of the conversations out in the world of public education is around having kids in text that they can read, leveled text that match the reader. And there's so much evidence and research to suggest that we need to be putting more challenging texts in front of kids so that they have the opportunities, with support from teachers, to really understand complex ideas and engage in more analytical thinking. And that really comes from reading more complex texts. If you've ever read any of the readers for a first grader, you know there's not a whole lot of a storyline there. So those are the three things that teachers came back and supported as far as areas that they really want to see kids developing, an area of need.
Is that feedback at the elementary level, or is that across the board?
We haven't had our elementary meeting at the Board of Ed Curriculum Instruction, but I've been talking about it with the elementary CCSs, and I imagine it will come up as that conversation, in our conversation as well.
So,
With the high school.
Absolutely.
That we most recently
Okay.
met with.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, the reading and understanding more complex texts and demonstrating that they're able to showcase what they learned within a writing format.
Yeah.
so these come primarily from the middle and high school, and you expect that you'll see similar feedback from the elementary schools?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one you mentioned, Jenny, is a perennial for every high school teacher as being the end point of all those years of instruction. I think very frequently as a high school teacher, we have wonder and regret, and that's every high school everywhere. I wish they were farther along, and they're never as far along as we want them or need them to be. It's kind of
Well,
a
and
ethic.
from what I gathered too, it was more global. It wasn't just within an ELA format. Like
Yeah.
they need to showcase
question.
this writing capability within social studies, within math, and within science. Because when you have to explain why you came to an answer, if you're not a proficient writer, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah,
You don't
math
have the
too,
skill
yeah.
set to substantiate that.
No question. So I can't tell you how excited we are. The work that the board did around their priorities, their vision, mission, and goals is very important. You know, it's at the top of the mountain and saying these are the things that we want to invest in. And quite frankly, when you look back demographically, Gene's numbers start in 2012. We have more than a 10% reduction in staff. We have only 10% reduction in students over the last 10 years, but we have increased our staffing resources. And we're still not yielding the results that we want. That tells us, obviously, we need to retool a little bit. It isn't a lack of talent, it isn't a lack of effort. It's just, obviously, we're not putting effort into the right things. So from a leadership, from the leaders and the educators in the classroom, we need to do better with what we have. So the first component of communication is the teachers, and I'll just call them the tip of the spear because they're not solely responsible for communicating with families around these topics, but very frequently, especially in the elementary school, it's a constant relationship with those families in their intimate classrooms. But really, it's all of us. It's the building principals and the district administrators as well, and the teachers at the tip of the spear. And our families as an integral part, our students obviously are an integral part, and our families that help support beyond the scope of our 6.5 hours in school. And it's kind of a cyclic process where we're all working together. We heard over and over, it doesn't matter when you give a survey, almost always communication is one of those areas where people feel as though we need to improve. And I think it's always been difficult for us to put our finger on, is that the website? Is it emails? Is it teacher phone calls? Is it phone calls from the principal? Is it coffee with the superintendent? What is it? What is it? We really need to find out what it is, because without that collaboration, we're never going to move, we're never going to climb that hill, that moving target. So we know that's something that we need to take very seriously. And as we talked about at the last meeting, the communication committee is going to come back together, look at the feedback from the community survey around communication, and we'll ask some of these questions and see if we can better distinguish what people need in order for us to move the needle. And the second board goal is around culture and climate. We just jotted down some things here that we know budgetarily and through construction projects that are priorities for us that we're going to work on to help get to. And again, each of the board goals, they haven't been vetted out yet in the district committees. You know, we said we're going to do it at the district leadership team, at the building leadership team, maybe the health and safety team, maybe whatever committees that exist that would be relevant to the work that we have to do. So these are just things that we know we're doing now, but they're by no means the extent of what we know we will be doing. The cameras are well on their way to being installed and operational at the elementary schools, where they had basically 2 cameras in their entire facility. Now they have a full complement of cameras. Some of them are very heavy and they make light poles fall over, but we took care of that. And the door locks as part of this current project. When we install the new doors at the high school and middle school, they'll get their new door locks. And if we can potentially get the materials, there's a possibility the elementary schools will get theirs sooner, potentially this summer or fall. And those are the door locks with the badge access. Yeah, Mel?
As they're happening.
Well, we're not, the only thing we've done so far is the safety audit. And that we talked about in our district health and safety meeting 2 days ago. And a component of that is to do a subcommittee that's going to figure out how to operationalize it. That's when we'll share out the results of that with the staff. As far as the other things, until we know timelines, we really haven't shared out to say, there's nothing more disappointing actually when you say, you're going to get a new, but we don't know when you're going to get it. So we haven't really broadly done that yet. Bill is very, very good, and actually we have our construction management company. They have estimated timelines of which phases of the project will occur when. Once, and we have a few more meetings to talk about, well, first, state ed hasn't approved it yet, which is a detriment to all of us. There's another disappointment. And then being able to go to bid, then we'll have a more hardened ability to share a calendar.
I just want to make sure teachers are being
Yeah.
made aware, because I don't think they knew that the cameras were going in, so
Yeah.
that was
And how they would be used, so we have to do that
right,
as well.
right, that's got to be communicated.
I don't think they're operational yet. I feel like they're working on it, but
Okay.
that's a good point. The safety audit was just completed just 3 weeks ago, and we don't have the full report yet, but we're expecting to have that soon. I talked about that with we'll have a small committee that looks at that and works on our new Violence Prevention Act policies. Signage and wayfinding, that will be a part of the new paving that we're going to do at each of the buildings. And we've talked about repeatedly how anyone that enters our campus is driving into a black hole. You know, there's 15 different ways to go, and every building's made out of brick. So that will be a clear signage. We were talking about a map at the entrance, both entrances to the campus, so when people come on, they can see middle school, high school, transportation, et cetera. But we're waiting until we have the parking lots done. There's some minor changes in the layout from that. So we want to make sure everything's in place the way we intend it to be, and that state approval is relevant to that. And then the Stop Finder app was one of the things that we've been using at transportation. And as Jesse's talked about a few times, with the implementation of GPSs on the buses, it will be a game changer as to how we've been implementing that. I mean, although we've been able to communicate, it has not been that real-time communication. It has been email communication or text message when there's an issue or when there's a bus that's late. And it's very human-driven. We've talked about when the bus garage has everybody out driving except for one person, and it's very hard to communicate with families even through that app. So when we're able to launch the GPS portion, we know that that will significantly improve, well, communication, right? Improve the quality of that communication with our families. There you go. I think I missed one. I think I did too. I double-clicked it. Okay, thanks. So the third culture and climate was included in culture and climate. It's not just physical safety, it's about emotional safety. We talked about the assessments used at the elementary school in the last couple of meetings, and we recognize that although restorative practices have a presence in our district, and although we train people, you know, I train Jean, but I don't train Sue. Half of us don't know. And Jean retires and someone new comes in, and then the new person doesn't know. Restorative practices clearly have a place in our repertoire of work. We talked about that as part of our discipline committee and the code of conduct. And we need to be, just like Mel asked, do teachers know about the cameras? Do we all understand and know what those are and what that means and how it's recorded in Synergy? Can we see that something happened? There's a lot of layers to it, but we recognize that although some people are trained, a lot of people don't have any idea what it is or how to use that. And the Code of Conduct Committee worked to identify the areas of weakness. And we're going to be doing some work at the building level, trying to improve language and also improve the language in our student data management platform so that things make more sense. Like the assault thing at the elementary school where, yes, physical attack for students playing on playground is not necessarily representative of what happens. So we want to make sure that students and families and staff all understand what those things are.
So when I think through the lens of what do we need to do moving forward with regard to addressing both academic outcomes and culture and climate, I wanted to first focus on the work that I see us doing around social emotional development through professional learning, because New York State has introduced and reintroduced the New York State social emotional learning benchmarks, and I think it's important for staff to be introduced to those and understand what they are. They're very clear, and they haven't gotten, I guess, as much press as we've seen with other standards implementations and rollout, because they are not aligned to any particular content area or discipline, and they aren't tested on tests, but they are absolutely representative of the kinds of people that we want to put out into the world. So I think that would be important professional learning moving forward. Brian talked a little bit about restorative practices, and I've lumped that together with trauma-informed practices. When we think about what students carry with them when they come into school, we want to make sure that we are approaching them through that lens as often as we can, and having some implemented professional development around that over the next several years. And I think both of those things can help connect us with families, because it does require a partnership. The image that Brian used, the connection with families in school and students is absolutely critical, and these are the things that get to that.
And I will say, you have children, you have staff that you work with, you may work in schools yourself, some of you do. We keep hearing the expression COVID children, or students who survived that era. That is its own form of trauma. I think that when people say that, we made it through COVID, or they're not the same, that is its own form of trauma. That wasn't our childhood, it wasn't our experience. They were segregated and kept alone, and all kinds of weird things happened. We were too. So we're not necessarily in a better place. We don't yet have the tools to balance that negative right now. We're still trying to bring them out of themselves and get them to communicate and participate and draw them out, and they're still not there, and this is nothing that we've ever lived through before. So we have some things to learn. I think that the trauma-informed instruction would be helpful for ourselves too, for ourselves and the students.
And I think it's important for the professional learning that I envision happening over the next several years is you have to understand it before you can actually see it in practice and think about how it will be reflected in our curriculum revision and implementation over time. So it is something that I see happening over multiple years.
Oh, and one last thing I'll say is, we say student results are poor because we went through those 2 years. Everybody's kids did. Every school district in New York and throughout the country, and we're behind them. That's the thing that's most concerning to us. We want to remedy both things, recognize the challenges for our own kids, and then surpass everyone around us and make them chase us.
For the professional development that you're envisioning, do you have some kind of, or will you, I don't know if it's done or formulated yet, have some kind of plan to help those who come on board mid-cycle to catch up on those things? Because if you're working with a baseline and assuming that all the teachers have this set of knowledge and someone comes in February with the expectation of this, I just want to make sure that we're providing the staff with
We're going to get
somewhat
smart,
level
Jenny.
playing field with regards to these things, especially if you're going to be expecting them to not introduce or use, but be informed about, I guess.
Each year, before the beginning of the school year, we have 2 full days with our onboarding staff. Each time we introduce something new for our existing staff, we're going to integrate that into the onboarding of the staff who are coming in.
Okay.
And we leave like a lot of the day-to-day stuff. They have mentors or helping teachers that are other teachers who have the knowledge. We leave like photocopier and bathroom and break room. We leave that to the mentors. That's not as important in those opening days as this is.
Right.
So we're getting smarter. We're going to layer those things into our onboarding with our new teachers.
I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about here exactly.
Okay.
So restorative practices, what is that? And can you give me some examples?
You know, you should be on the Code of Conduct Committee. It's just what I have gone through as far as training and understanding that, and I think that people have had different exposures to it. But it really is an understanding of, when we have behaviors, they do require, in many cases, some level of consequence. You've done something, you need to know that it was something wrong. But at the same time, when we talk about restorative practices, it really does take another path or parallel path around understanding and having the student understand where that came from and getting to the root of it. I think special education teachers are probably the best at it because they think about, what is the behavior, but what is the cause of the behavior? So if you keep providing a consequence, but it isn't getting to the root of the behavior, then you're never going to address it in a really consequential way. So that, in my version, is restorative practices.
I have a shorter answer.
Oh, you do? Okay.
There's a consequence for the discipline, and then there's something meaningful that comes after it that explains to the student what they've done. They've caused harm to the community, they've caused harm to an individual, they've caused harm to the building. That could be through community service, it could be through a restorative circle, it could be through, we don't put like victims and perpetrators together, that's not what I mean. A restorative circle might have those people in it. We can do student court. There are other ways. It doesn't negate the discipline part, but what does it gives meaning. Because I was using with Jean the example earlier that do really good prison guards in prisons stop crime after they're released? Recidivism rate is very high in this country. So what's the message we can teach our kids at this point now when it's the best time to learn? It's a fairly safe environment for them to do so without consequences that will change the path of their life. Learn the real lesson, not just having the consequence, because it doesn't stop them from doing it. They're just more clever, maybe, the next time they try.
Okay.
And even the examples that Brian gave are sort of broader. I mean, it can be something as simple as with a first grade student, having them be able to articulate and even draw a picture of what they could do differently next time, because they knew they did harm to someone on the playground. Instead of pushing them, what else could you do?
Okay, thanks.
The other piece of where I see work for us to do is really focusing on the academic outcomes. And I have talked a little bit about this, but I think there's a lot of different ways we could approach this, but I think developing student literacies through professional learning and curriculum design. It was interesting, just the conversation that we had across content areas around the impact of literacy skills in science and in math. So you can see that happening. So what we really want to do is think about professional development over time that identifies and helps teachers implement high-impact instructional practices. And this is one of the things that I think is really challenging because it sends a message sometimes, or it's perceived that when we talk about that teachers aren't doing what they should be in their classrooms, and that isn't what I'm saying. We have a changing demographic. We have kids that look different than we have ever seen before. I've heard teachers say it all the time. And as an educator, it's really hard, all of us as educators, it's hard when you have a set of skills that you've been tapping into and you've been successful with, and you don't have anything to replace them. And that's the work that I see us doing with teachers and cafeteria workers and TAs and BAs is, what can you do? Let us show you some ways that you can do things slightly differently that might have a greater impact. I do see a need for us to focus and prioritize early literacy development with resources, professional development, alignment, and for older students, well, actually across the board, but really connecting literacy instruction both vertically and across content areas. I think helping kids see those connections is going to be really important. And part of the way that we also get kids really invested in school and academics is thinking about how we can enhance our course and program offerings so that the learning here is relevant, and kids are excited about it, and they see that it's valuable here within the walls of our schools, but also out in the world.
Opportunities for field trips?
I-
It's a very serious question.
Well, yeah, I think, because when you think about field trips, Jenny, you want it to be connected to the curriculum, and you want kids to be able to have something to hold on to that really exemplifies what they've been learning, or, being able to visualize what something is that they've learned about that they don't have anything else to hold on to. So I see that as being really part of curriculum development. Where do we make meaningful, learning meaningful, and also very concrete for some of our kids? CTE,
At the
different,
younger ages, so they know that those are viable options and
yeah.
maybe get excited about them earlier.
Yeah, and I know that the middle school has done some exploring of that in the past couple of years. One of the challenges that we run into is staffing for that. Certifications, who can teach those kind of things. And I'm hoping that with the Blue Ribbon Commission's recommendations for graduation changes, that will have over time, hopefully we'll have a trickle down to opening up some of the opportunities, some more flexibility for schools so that they can offer
My
some more.
understanding is this certification's a little bit easier to come by at the elementary level than the upper middle school level. So is that something that we're exploring?
Well,
Because I know sixth grade was still able to do it, where seventh and eighth weren't because of certification stuff.
And not all of the children
The
had access to
CTE,
it.
we were just discussing it with the middle school, that the sixth graders were still able to do some of the CTE implementation because the certification was able to be had easier at the elementary level, and sixth grade was considered elementary.
sixth grade is still considered a 1 through 6 certification, so
Right.
you are a generalist, whereas once you hit the secondary level, you become specialists.
Right.
Yes.
So that leads to maybe CTE being able to go down younger into the elementary school?
Yeah, and I think you raise an interesting, because I think there's some really excellent opportunity within our STEAM program to be able to do and when you see some of the things that they're doing, you can see that already
Okay,
happening.
all right.
Some
That was my
early
that was really
engineering,
what I was
coding,
getting at.
yes,
Yeah, okay.
absolutely.
They're designing and building and coding and robotics and is
But also
Pretty
the
broad.
plumbing and the building and
So, just to summarize, thinking about ongoing work that we need to really focus on with curriculum instruction is making sure that we continue an ongoing cycle of assessment, review, revising curriculum, implementing it with changes, closely checking how that's going through assessment, and keep that cycle going. That should be an ongoing thing for any school district. And thinking through the lens of the Office of Curriculum and Instruction and making sure that our professional learning focuses on those 3 areas: high-impact instructional practices, SEL benchmarks, and trauma-informed instruction, and of course, ongoing work with safety and physical updates for the culture and climate.
And I'm going to be controversial and say, we have for years set our targets and action plans around improving by 2%, improving by 3%, improving by 4%. In other words, students, I'm making up numbers, okay? So 64% of students at grade 4 are reading on grade level. We're going to increase that by 2% by the end of the year. I think we need to change our perspective and say 36% of our students are not. Let's eliminate that. We want 100%. I think we need to stop reaching for 2 and 3%. I think we need to aspire for 100, and if we fail at that, that's a lot more noble than succeeding at 2 or 3. So I think we need to be more harsh on ourselves, because it's not about, we don't win anything if we achieve a low number, and I'm not disrespecting our work to date because it takes effort to get to 2%. This is a heavy lift. These aren't like books and stuff you can just pick up and move. These are humans. But I think that we need to be realistic and know that every person's child has the right to be able to read, to be able to do numeracy, to be able to have CTE experiences, every child. So as we go into next year, I want those targets and action plans to be reflective of that. No more 2 and 3%, big gains. If we fall short, we're going to fail big with big gains in the end. That's a better way to look at this.
To that end, will the professional development be targeted to the populations that need it the most? If we're focusing on early literacy, is that going to be one of the target areas for professional development to the early childhood educators?
Yeah, and it's hard because when you see, there's lots of things that we can work on, and even in this presentation, I've just named like things that would keep us busy with professional learning over the next 10 years. I am of a mindset that if you target a particular area, in order to really dive in deep and do it well over time, my focus would be on literacy. And that would be early literacy, but it would be literacies across grade levels, because I think it's a valuable, it's a high leverage point, because if we address that, it will impact math scores, it will impact social, kids will feel better about themselves if they are more able to participate in a lot of the things that we're asking them to do. So yes, I do think, and that's, on my more minute, as I'm draft planning professional development and learning over the next several years, really thinking about, and I think about primary instruction as pre-K through 2, and really aligning that vertically and making sure that we have a curriculum that is developmentally appropriate for kids, but also really raises the expectations as we move through the grade levels.
There's 2 committees that are working on this all the time. The board's curriculum and instruction committee, looking at this from programmatic and results-oriented standpoint, and there's a professional practices committee that is district and teacher leadership representation, who talk about how we're going to professionally develop the staff to get to the things that we need to do. And it's a pretty good marriage.
Before I say this. The other thing I wanted to reiterate, because I know that when you think about budget presentations, you think about, well, what are you asking for? And for this initial presentation, I really wanted to highlight that I want to make sure that we are allocating the resources we have, and we have a lot here. As Brian mentioned, even the increase in staffing over time, so that we can really kind of focus on being more efficient with the resources that we have. And I think it's really important with the goals that we have established as a board to really guide that work. And that's going to come through continuous curriculum revision, high quality professional development, and sustained professional development, and attending to culture and climate needs.
And sharing the results with the board on an ongoing basis, so you know how we're doing.
So as we look toward the remaining budget presentations, we're thinking we want to be able to provide more detailed information about proposed budget recommendations for staffing and services for next year. And so this presentation really was intended to clarify those areas of focus that you will see represented in those recommendations in the upcoming meetings.
Okay.
I did not tell you sooner because I didn't want you to click on it and get distracted, but slide 6 has all of Hattie's research. In other words, you can see what is considered to be the greatest gaining for student achievement. So on your own time or later on, you can go on Board Docs and click on that link, and you can see it listed 1 to 252 of those greatest gaining behaviors. And I will tell you, the good news is when you walk into classrooms, you see some of these top 10 things happening in our classrooms. So it's a win. And what we want is we want to be purposeful. We want to be well-trained. We want to be able to measure whether that's happening. And then we want to get the results that our kids deserve, all of our kids deserve. Any questions for Jean? Just for Jean.
Oh, thank you both. Oh, sorry, Mike.
I've got a quick question, and maybe this is the wrong time to ask it, but we came in tonight for the district areas of focus. It was budget presentation number 2. Given everything that we've seen here and how you presented this, do you have an anticipation at all yet of how it will affect the overall budget in general?
When we come together, as soon as the next meeting, Mike, what we'll start talking about is what our intentions are around staffing Obviously, none of this happens without quality professionals doing the work. So we will, this was just a precursor to that, and the staffing is overwhelmingly the majority of our budget.
Right.
That combined with, so if there were any increases in staffing in our general budget, combined with lowered aid from the state, combined with the acceleration of salaries based on collective bargaining, those are the three challenges that all schools face, and we certainly will face, and that's what we'll be discussing in the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you both. Business considerations. We have 6.1 through 6.7. Is there a motion for one or more? Okay, Jenny, Paul, second, Kristen. Any discussion? Mike?
No, I was just seconding.
Yeah, any discussion?
6.4 on the middle school recess agreement. I was just wondering what was the change? Like, what did this previously say? What is the difference on this?
That's the recess, right?
Yes.
Yes, it's about the middle school recess.
So we have always had cafeteria monitors as part of the teacher contract. And we have students at recess, and we currently do not have sufficient support staff to monitor them outside, because our teachers are inside in the cafeteria, and the students go half and half. Half are inside, half are out. This allows us to create a position so that we can have a member of the teaching unit be outside as well if they choose to.
Okay. That's the only change that this was making? Okay,
Just adding that.
got it. Thank you.
Anything further? All right, just one quick question on 6.7 that I had. This is the transportation study. Is there a cost associated with that? And I apologize if it's in there, but I couldn't find it when I looked.
Description, but, so, let me just pull up, just make sure I get the right numbers. So overall, it was 180,000 for the overall cost, but we get it reimbursed through NYSERDA, 75% of that.
Okay,
So they'll pay for 135,000 of it, and so the whole district cost is 33,000.
32,000?
33.
33,000?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, all of that is aidable. If the budget, I mean, if the governor's proposal goes through, we will actually get aid on the 180,000 and not just the 33,000. Yeah. And again, that study will give us everything we need, you know, infrastructure-wise, bus purchasing-wise, staff-wise, mechanic-wise, equipment we need for the transition of the two EV buses.
yeah,
So.
okay, thanks. Anything further? All right, all in favor? Aye? All right, personnel considerations, 7.1 through 7.18. Motion for one or all?
For all.
Jackie? All?
All.
Okay, second. Kristen? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye? Aye. All right, let's move to you, Brian, for your report.
The junior class has spoken. When does a junior class ever have a chance to speak? But they looked at the last two renderings for the logo, and they selected the one that looks almost exactly like our students' rendering, the one that Madeline Babcock did. And it's the vectored version of it is really cool. It's going to look awesome. Michelle, our communications person, met with the folks at BOCES today to try and finalize some things. And we are hoping, we had March as our target date for our new branding guide. Branding guides have font, the words that we'll be using on our different letterhead and on our clothing, on our fields, and the graphics, the logo that we have.
One question I have, the bottom is blank. Will it say
Yeah,
RCS?
it will have either RCS or Ravens in it.
Okay.
We were just in an effort to try and like show at least what it looked like.
Okay,
But,
that was my only question on it.
And even since then, we've done a few updates to the ribbon, because trying to make it look even is
Yeah.
really hard. It
Okay.
shouldn't look like a drawing. By the time it gets to a vector, it should look like I equated to, it's like, when you look at a badge of a policeman, it says police. You
Yeah,
can see.
well, because it's very nice, but like you said, it's a little uneven, and then it just has like a box underneath, so it
Yes.
just doesn't look
Yes.
color, what's the word? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's very nice.
I'm going to send it to you two to vet it before I send it
All
to
right,
anybody else,
Okay,
okay?
sounds good.
No pressure.
We're very vested.
That's Mel and Kristen, for those of you at home. The school calendar for next year, BOCES adopted their calendar about a month ago, and it is a complex calendar. If you've watched the news, you see that there are some new holidays we're required to implement in there. The BOCES calendar is 187 days. It's a very long year. It starts right after Labor Day and goes, I think, to the end of that last full week in June, just about to the end of it. Students are still only in attendance 180 days. So that's important to remember, but it will be, that calendar is in development in district, and we'll be talking to members of different units to get their input as we develop that. This year was a weird year. We have 2 days off in March that we've never had off before, because there were so many days this year.
15th, because I was gonna ask, why do we have the 15th off?
Because there were more days between the first day of school and the last day of Regents than we needed. So even BOCES has that day off this
Okay.
year.
I just saw it, and I was like, oh, God, why are we off? Okay.
But we'll be working on that for the next few weeks, and we try and hit like, we try and have it done by the end of March so that families can start to plan going into next year. And the board will adopt that calendar, just so you know,
Yep.
as part of the process. And the school musical is happening after our next board meeting, but tickets are on sale now. I'm probably taking Jean's announcement, but I've seen some of the pre-production stuff, and if you've ever seen any show here, it is 100% worth the investment of going. But you can buy your tickets online right now. That's all I have.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Jean?
So the Code of Conduct Committee finished up the small subcommittee work that we did. Brian mentioned it in the presentation. So we identified areas of need and review at all levels, and that is on the agenda at our upcoming leadership meeting to review, and then we have separate meetings with the principals so that we can talk through that. And they were all represented at the table, but some folks weren't there. So we'll be working through that, and so they can bring those back to their BLTs to sort of problem solve and identify what they want to prioritize. We also identified that we want to make sure that the Code of Conduct document is updated. So we want to include definitions of bullying and harassment. We want to update the images. We want to review and update the descriptors for behaviors. So what we talked about in the committee was, because it's getting in the weeds, that kind of work, and to have a large committee could be challenging. So what we proposed was having a smaller subcommittee do that work. And again, sort of a review cycle. They would take that information, bring it back to their BLTs for review and input, bring it back to the larger, or to the small subcommittee for us to reflect on that, and take those recommendations and implement them before actually putting a final product in front of the board for approval. I kind of mapped out dates for that, and I see us being able to get through 2 cycles of doing that and getting feedback from the BLTs if they have room on their agendas, so that we can have a draft ready to put in front of the board by late in the year, maybe even over the summer. I wanted to get back to your question from the last presentation about the daily screener, social emotional screener. So the middle school and the high school do not use Close Gap. In doing some research, during the pandemic, the State Education Department really encouraged schools to do some level of social emotional screening, and Close Gap was something that was free, had been vetted, so the middle school and the elementary schools were using them. What they found, even at the elementary school, but I think Deb had mentioned at the last presentation, they've seen more families involved. At the middle school level, there were many families that didn't participate, so the data wasn't as useful. And so that high rate of family opt-out was challenging. And then what we talked about when I talked with the principals, it really is thinking through the lens of what do they do instead of that? And, first of all, you've got older students, so they can articulate and advocate for themselves in different ways than a first grader might be able to. We also have pretty strong PBIS programs in both the middle school and the high school, and that's a way of addressing students' social emotional needs that's more whole scale rather than that daily screening. And really just the logistics of being able to use a screener in a classroom where students are there all day at the elementary level, whereas at the middle school and high school, they have an extended homeroom. Students would be filling out a screener and then going off to another class or being in that classroom, and being able to do that in the moment, sort of support for kids would be challenging at the middle school and high school level. So at this time, they don't have one. You looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes, because after our last meeting, I also recalled we were discussing it.
Yeah.
The communication that went out surrounding that was not very clear to middle school parents at the time.
Yeah.
And I know that I personally opted my child out because what I heard from other parents at the time, we didn't really get a whole lot of clarification on what it was. And obviously, gathering our children's data is always concerning without our presence. So I think our added focus on communication
Yeah.
would have helped.
And it's interesting too, because I think about different ways that teachers address that. Even something, we have an application called Nearpod that allows you to do interactive presentations. A lot of teachers use it because it's easy and it syncs with Google Classroom. And oftentimes, teachers would include, like in that first slide, when kids come in, just to check in, how you feeling today? And that data gets fed to the teacher right away. So they can kind of get a pulse of the class for each of the 5 classes that come to them over the course of the day. So there's other ways to gauge that. They're not capturing the data like they are at the elementary school, but if the principals and the team that they're working with, even on PBIS, weren't finding it as useful, I didn't see a reason to kind of push forward with that piece for them.
Though, like any kind of formal or informal check-in sort of that's done with the middle and high school level on a daily basis, like, if closed gap is being used at the elementary level, because I know, this, I can see, on here in part, the reason for discontinuing it is the idea that students can advocate for themselves and and access SEL support independently. But I think that, as parents, as teachers, I'm sure you also find it, humans aren't always going to just be like, hey, I'm struggling today. And I think especially when you're in, middle school, high school years, I think that you're going to find it rare to find a student who's just gonna come up and be like, hey, Miss Molina, I'm not having a great day this morning. I think that they're less likely to do that. And, perhaps with prompting, especially, I appreciate in the closed gap, I understand the reasons it doesn't work here, but in closed gap, they have a moment to kind of reflect and be able to do so in a non-confrontational way. They're not, needing to go up and, in people who, if they're struggling with mental health disorders or anything like that, especially even just saying the words out loud can be really hard. So I want to make sure that there's something in place that, these middle schoolers and the high schoolers, they do still have some kind of routine check-in to make sure that they're doing okay. And I think that it loops back to sort of our, communication with the students, but also the social emotional, the safety side of it. The smallest things sometimes can make the biggest impact on a kid who's struggling emotionally. And even just knowing that somebody is paying attention and checking in can be that difference. So do we have something that we do now, or sort of an intention of what we will do, or what we could do in the absence of closed gap for those older kids?
You mean a system that everyone uses?
I mean, a system that everyone uses, or even just a practice that is done in, sort of across the board to make sure that there aren't students falling through, in the gaps there.
We don't have, I don't see anything that we're planning on adopting or thinking through, but I think, Jackie, that is something that I think would come out of some of the professional learning that we'll be doing around, trauma-informed and practices, and even just exploring the social emotional learning benchmarks, because it will help us maybe not say that everyone's doing this, but that these are the practices we would expect to see in a classroom, more general things like, it's something as simple as teachers standing at their door when kids walk in. Hey, how's it going? Those kind of things, that those are general practices that I think we'd like to see happening for kids.
Yeah.
But in answer to your question, no, we don't have anything that's like in the hopper that we've been thinking about for right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, I mean, even, in those professional learning sort of things, even just in those informal interactions, I think can go a long way. Obviously, the formality of it gives us a lot more data and whatnot, and I think it's nice on the elementary level that they have sort of a second to breathe and sort of think about how they're feeling and actually like recognize their own, oh, I am hungry. Oh, I am being kind of cranky today. Having just a moment to reflect, I think can be huge. So I just want to make sure that there's something, even if it's something as simple, like you said, as making sure that there's practices that someone is always taking 2 seconds to check in on a kid, when they come in the morning, and making sure that they have the opportunity to recognize if something is wrong.
Yeah. And the other thing I do want to point out, because I think it's been important work that Colleen's office has been doing around, we do have really, I think, some robust mental health services through our social work and through our counselors. And Colleen has worked really hard to help start, not tracking that, but tracking the data, like how many kids are we meeting with? I was able to sit in on a meeting with the high school principals and the social workers earlier this year, and just having those weekly conversations around, here's some high needs kids, here's who we've been seeing, here's what we're noticing you need to be aware of. And those are for, some more significant needs, but we are starting to track the kinds of kids that we're working with and making sure that we're following up on them. And it's, partly because we're mandated to do that, but it's also good practice.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
It's good practice, but you're not talking to the parents afterwards, right?
Talking,
You're not saying to the parents, hey, this is what we noticed, and this is what we're doing to try to help solve this problem.
It depends, Mike. It depends on like the nature of the issue. If it's, I think there's unquestionably a line where they would involve the parent, because many of these issues can't be resolved just with a 20-minute session with a social worker.
Right.
I don't think that there's anything that preempts them from communicating with families. I think that's the norm more than the exception of not doing it,
Okay.
The other two, well, one thing I didn't put on my slide presentation is that next Tuesday is our last professional development half-day. Last time we have release time for teachers, so I'll be able to give you updates on how that went. And then just as a heads up, our pre-K registration opens up on Friday, and it goes through March 19th. So we'll be collecting those registrations during that time period and monitoring whether or not we'll need a lottery for the spots that we have. And then we've got some dates for pre-K screening on May 14th and 15th, and they'll be here again.
Are they doing the days at the elementary schools? I'm sorry if I missed that. They used to do a day where they had a fun,
I'm
do
trying.
they do that anymore?
Yeah, Brian had mentioned that, and Michelle, our communications specialist, reached out to the folks at the library to see if we could try to coordinate that again.
So they have reached out to the agencies who have traditionally participated. We haven't done it since before the pandemic, so.
Oh, okay.
But we're waiting to see. And we all agree that even if people can register online, it's a great opportunity for them to come into the building and familiarize themselves. We have a bus there.
I was talking to some pre-K parents, and I was like, oh, we have this great day. I guess
We hopefully do. Well, we've got a really vibrant, the people at the library are vibrant and exciting.
Kathy
about-
Meyer usually runs that, right?
That's who's helping
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
so.
Good, good.
So ideally,
wonderful.
she'll be able to get the providers still exist, right? And hopefully she'll be able to get them, because I think that was a great first impression. The kids got to play little games, and they had resources in the community. They had a bus, so they could get on and off the bus and see what that was like. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's our hope. So we'll have.
It was very nice for the parent organizations, by the way, also to be able
yeah,
to
yes,
say,
yes.
parents, welcome to the building, so.
It's a hope. I cannot believe how fast time is moving. So, yeah. So that's all I have tonight.
All right, thanks, Jean. Jesse?
I just have a few projects, updates for everybody, what's going on around the district. The dugouts, they're gonna do a little bit more prep for the dugouts, around March 11th, the pads, and then, they will be delivered, around March 14th. Bill is gonna be sending out a communication to everybody so they know, because there's gonna be some pretty big sized cranes. So we're gonna do some organization, so there's no risk to anybody in the buildings, around these deliveries. As Dr. Bailey mentioned, the cameras are up in the buildings in both schools, both elementary schools. They are not online yet, but they will be pretty soon. We're finishing up some more details with that, but they will be up soon. As most people know, there was a lighting pole incident right before break. So we had Building and Grounds review it over break, all the poles at all of our campuses, just to make sure they're structurally sound. They did find another one at Peter B. That some of the fasteners were rusted. So out of precaution, we did take that down. So we are working with our district architect to replace those ones that came down. Peter B. playground update. We do plan on doing demolition of the current one on March 11th. That is weather pending. And then the equipment has been ordered, as I mentioned in previous meetings. And we are still on target for install date towards end of May, early June. So hopefully we can get that up and running. And then the kids can go back out there and play.
So between the demo and the install, there'll be nothing?
Well, it's just that one that's marked off right now is what's going to be demoed. All the other, the swings will still be there and all the other one, it's just that main structure is not going to be. And right now, they're not using it anyways because it was not safe.
I was gonna say,
Is
that
there-
playground has been relatively underwater and the problems with some of the equipment, the kids have barely been able to use it at all this year.
Is the drainage being adrassed as
Yes.
part of this
Yep,
install as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, yeah, there'll be a new base, which will be much better drainage, and we won't have the current issue we're having now.
So what is the alternative being offered to those students currently then if they've been unable to utilize the playground for that period of
They
time?
play a lot of tag.
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
I would say they play a lot of tag.
There's still a lot of
They enjoy
structures out there.
the basketball court occasionally, but
Is there any additional equipment that we could be providing them?
Other ends that we
So
built,
they are able to use that one?
no, they can't, I
No,
don't
the-
think
the
they're allowed
little
to
ones.
use that one, right, so there's the
pre-K and the
pre-K
kindergarten.
one, but that's not able to be used, I think, for any grade aside from pre-K.
my understanding was pre-K and kindergarten.
Sorry, maybe kindergarten is allowed to use it as well, but all of
That
the other
leaves
grades have,
5
no,
other
they do
grades
not,
that
right,
have
they do not have any
nothing, right.
equipment.
They don't have anything. There's still a lot of equipment out there that they do have. It's just they don't have that main structure
Yeah.
at this point.
Well, and that other one structure has been
That's gonna be
falling
part-
apart for
yes,
quite
as
some
well. That
time
one will be
and has
taken down as
been,
well.
yeah.
Okay. Seems like we should offer them something, but okay.
Transportation, we did have the company come in and put in all the GPSs and the tablets and the mounts in all of the buses that we have. I believe there's only 2 spares that haven't been installed yet, but we do have plans. So right now, we do have it in all of our buses. So the next step, we'll be getting extensive training for our office and our bus drivers, so they'll be able to do it. And then hopefully, once we get all that up and running and everybody's trained on it, we hope to do some pilot runs in May. And then everybody in the summer program should be using it. So hopefully, cross your fingers, still very early. Hopefully by summer, all the kids going to Discovery Camp or going to any of the out-of-district placement runs will be using this system. So it's very exciting. I've been talking to a lot of the bus drivers down there. They're excited as well. They think it's going to be very helpful for them. So, I think this is going to be great. That's all I have.
We did want to ask the board if they would consider adding a budget workshop to the calendar. The reason is it seems like we're having a lot of meetings. We have these 2 in a row, but you had the April break in between. we want to ensure that we have as many opportunities as possible to offer the board the information that they need. And a budget workshop, it doesn't have any of the formality of a meeting like this. All it is just presentations and discussion open to the public. We wanted to add it on March 27th. It's the Wednesday before we leave for spring break. So we have one on the 20th of March, and then we wanted to have one on the 27th, just a workshop.
So, yeah, the 27th would be like the all-encompassing one. That would be like, this is the one, this is what we recommend. We want to make sure you guys had all the information. You can sit and think it through before you made the vote at the next one.
Yeah, because the vote is on April 10th, and it's kind of a hard date, because we've got to rotate all of our communications and get it into families' hands within like 25 days. That's a lot to do with printing and mailing distribution. By law, we have to have it in their hands. So squeezing that extra one in there, we think will be helpful. We don't want you to get a presentation on the 10th and then say, okay, vote. Yeah. So we can start it right at, no, we
Nope,
can
just
start
the
at
board.
6
Yep,
o'clock. And
yep.
And the community can attend.
Absolutely.
What was that, Jen? I couldn't hear.
The community can attend.
Oh, yeah.
Will it also be live streams like the rest of the board meetings?
I have no like the community to attend. Maybe I could
Good,
stay.
it's good with me. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Would we do 6 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that it, Jesse?
That's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Anybody have any new business items?
Given the conversation that we had surrounding PBIS, at some point, I think it would be nice to hear what the different schools are doing for PBIS so that we have a clearer picture of how that's being implemented. We know that closed gap is being used in the elementary schools, but you said that they had pretty robust programs. I'd love to hear what those are. I'd also like to hear about the elementary schools as well, but we at least know one component of theirs.
Anything else? Yeah.
When you were talking about the signage, Dr. Valley, is there any way that we can use the voting signs when there's big events going on, just to denote even middle school,
Traffic.
gym, high school, just to help in the interim before the pavement and all that happens?
Yes.
We
Yep.
have the signs anyway, might as well utilize them?
Yep.
The old business items, I think that we've touched on all of these throughout the various reports. So unless there's anything else, we'll move on from those, but keep them all on, keep them all there. So then we have the wellness policy, which is up for approval tonight. Is there a motion to approve the policy? Jackie, second. Jenny, is there any discussion on this policy? All right, all in favor? Aye. I have no reason to go into executive session. Does anybody else have a reason to go in? Okay, then I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. Jackie? Oh, we're going to get it to Mike. Mike's got that motion. Jackie, second, all in favor? Aye. All right, thank you.